You're listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, episode number 30, Low FODMAP Diet for Kids. I'm Jill Castle, registered dietitian, childhood nutrition expert, and host of the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy kids inside and out. Today, we are talking about the Low FODMAPs diet for kids with Kate Scarlata. We'll dish on what this diet is, who it's for, and who it isn't for, and the best ways to manage irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, in children. You can find today's show notes with all the links I mentioned over at www.jillcastle.com/30. That's 30 for episode number 30.
Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey, you guys, welcome back. If this is your first time here, thanks for tuning in and giving this show a try. I've been wanting to share my friend Kate Scarlata with you for a very long time. Kate's a registered dietitian, mom, runner, author, and low FODMAP diet educator. Don't worry, we will dig into what FODMAP means. After a major intestinal resection, she is not only a healthcare provider, but also a patient. She's on a mission to spread global awareness of the low FODMAP diet for those who suffer with functional gut disorders. Her passion is educating health professionals and digestively challenged patients through individual consultations, one-on-one coaching, and educational digestive health nutrition workshops. As a digestive health expert, she has authored The Complete Idiot's Guide to Eating Well with IBS and co-authored 21 Day Tummy, a New York Times bestseller. Kate writes the blog For a Digestive Peace of Mind, where she finds a positive and upbeat platform for low FODMAP diet followers to find up-to-date, evidence-based resources and research articles to educate accurately on the ever-changing science in digestive health. I met Kate a few years ago at our nutrition professional conference called FNCE, the Food and Nutrition Conference and Expo, and we've been fast friends ever since. Funny, I never knew her when I lived in the Boston area because she is from Boston, but our paths crossed when we had similar challenges with patients. She with a pediatric client and me with an IBS child. We sought each other out to gain perspective and consultation on each of our cases. Flash forward to this past winter when I was really struggling with IBS. I think I've mentioned before on the show on my trip to India last year, I contracted a rare case of dysentery, which had been slowly getting better through the summer and into the fall until the holidays hit. I really struggled through the holidays in the early part of this year with a lot of symptoms. I called on Kate to help me, and I remember whining to her about going on a special diet, saying that I didn't think I could follow it. She coached me through it, and my symptoms really turned around in about 4 days. I was on the low FODMAPs diet for a period of almost 6 weeks and was completely symptom-free at the end of that. I think you'll enjoy learning about the low FODMAP diet, especially if you've never heard of it before. It is relatively new, but it is something that has been a game changer for patients and families who struggle with gastrointestinal challenges. And Kate's going to cover how it's best used in children, as well as I think you'll just really enjoy Kate's perspective on the management of IBS in these patients. But before we get started, I want to mention a few things. The Smart Mom's Guide to Starting Solids is out. You can get the information you need to lay out the blueprint for nourishing your baby in the first year of life. From when to start solids, how to do it, and the best practices, this book updates you on all the latest guidelines while giving you the roadmap for feeding your baby first foods. You can get it on my website, www.jillcastle.com, or you can head over to Amazon and get the Kindle version. Are you a nutrition professional who cares for kids? Are you looking for ways to bring a deeper and more meaningful contribution to the parents with which you work? Let me help you learn more about food parenting in my Food Parenting Pro online course. Because it's not just about getting the food right, guys. You need to know how to teach parents to be good food parents. Registration for Food Parenting Pro will open in early May for nutrition professionals who want to learn and bring more positive food parenting into their practice with children and families. Food Parenting Pro is a 4-week series in June covering the key aspects of food parenting, including feeding practices, structure, and autonomy support. The format will be a live 2-hour video class with case studies and discussion. We will meet 4 times during the month of June, spaced out each week, to discuss the components of food parenting. And last, I have an opportunity for parents to work with me this summer in my VIP, Very Informed Parent Summer School. Are you starting to worry about how summer will go this year? How you will be able to stay on track with food and feeding this summer? Research shows that kids can get off track with eating over the summer for sure. They lack the structure and the routine that school provides. Let me arm you with the strategies you need to make this summer a success. You will tune in for 5 group educational sessions where we discuss food balance, strategies for healthy eating and feeding, and keeping kids active, sleeping, and self-regulated all summer long. Based on the popular Kids Healthy Weight Project course and tailored to real-life challenges that parents and kids deal with all summer. Enrollment is limited to 20 parents. Hey, Kate, welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast.
Hey, Jill, really great to be here.
I have been waiting, I feel like a long time for this day. I've been dying to have you on the show. And I was thinking back, was Florida the last time I saw you?
It was. I know. We've been both traveling around the country, especially you. And but it was Florida. That was fun.
Yeah, that was, I have to tell you, I got to meet, well, I got to meet your sweet husband. And so I'm just telling the audience, I got to meet your sweet husband.
Yes.
Remember when you and Russ walked me to my car in the parking garage?
Yeah.
That was like a mile away. It was such a long way to walk me, which was so sweet. But did I tell you I barely got out of the parking garage?
No.
The gate checkout thing, where you put your credit card in, it ate my credit card. Yes. Like that's the worst feeling when you're in, a foreign place and your credit card, you're like, and I only carry one credit card.
Yeah. Awful.
Anyways.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. Traveling woes, right? You've been traveling a lot. What have you been up to?
I know. Well, lately it's been mostly local talks, but I have upcoming talks in New Orleans, Portland, Oregon, Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm excited. I have a little flurry of low FODMAP talks ahead. So it's always fun. And also Chicago, I'm heading to Digestive Disease Week in a couple weeks. Which is always great. It's a premier digestive disease conference with really state-of-the-art information. So it's always a great conference to hit every year. So that's coming up as well. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. So whenever I try more recently, whenever I have guests on to sort of get their story. So Kate, what's your story?
So I have been a dietitian for like a million years. And in fact, when I went into nutrition, my family was like, what is that? What would you be doing? And it's amazing how far the field has come. But I was practicing in nutrition and dietetics for about 7 years, pregnant with my second child, and I developed during my pregnancy a strangulated intestine. I had had an ovarian cyst removed when I was 18, and they believe the scar tissue from that strangled my intestine. And as my uterus grew, it just caught the intestine in a certain way that it strangled it. And I ended up having emergency surgery. I lost 6 feet of my small intestine.
Wow.
And that really just positioned me in a different mindset to really want to understand digestive health more. And so, so here I am.
Nothing like a personal connection to drive your passion, right?
Totally.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today about digestive health in children, but specifically the low FODMAP diet. And I'm sure there are a lot of listeners that have never heard of the low FODMAP diet. So give us the rundown on what we're really talking about here.
Okay. So the low FODMAP diet was developed in Australia as a dietary approach to help individuals that have really quite debilitating GI symptoms associated with irritable bowel syndrome. And it's a diet that modifies certain very small carbohydrates that are commonly malabsorbed. And these carbohydrates, as they're malabsorbed, tend to drag water into the intestine, and they're fast food for our gut bacteria. And when gut bacteria eat them, they create gas. So in irritable bowel syndrome, for instance, gas and diarrhea often is a presenting symptom. And the diet has been shown to be very effective in individuals that suffer with irritable bowel syndrome.
So this is not something that is for kids with constipation or who just have diarrhea after antibiotic use. This is really more of a chronic picture of gassiness and diarrhea, correct?
You know what? Irritable bowel syndrome can present with diarrhea, absolutely, and it is more of a chronic condition. It's not an episodic, like you mentioned, diarrhea episode after being on antibiotics, or it really is different than constipation. And constipation itself is fairly prevalent in the pediatric crowd. It can occur in up to, there's a variety of ranges from 1 to 30%, but it's a common reason that kids go to a gastroenterologist is for constipation. But typically, constipation is very different than irritable bowel syndrome in the sense that it can be chronic. However, it doesn't typically present with a major cascade of symptoms, such as debilitating pain and tremendous amount of gas. You might have a little bit of gas, you might have a little bit of pain when the child is passing the stool, but it's very, very different, and it's managed very differently. The low FODMAP diet, because it's somewhat restrictive, is really for the patient that has irritable bowel syndrome. It also could be used as well for kids that were diagnosed with celiac disease and are on a gluten-free diet but do not have full symptom resolution on the gluten-free diet. And it's also used for children and adults with inflammatory bowel disease that often have an overlap of IBS. So not while they're in, a flare of their colitis, but their colitis is in remission, but they're still experiencing these overlapping IBS symptoms, then the low FODMAP diet may be indicated there. So yeah, it's not a diet just to hey, let's try a low FODMAP diet because my child has a little constipation now and again. It's not indicated for that.
Right, because it is a bit restrictive. So that's where I think parents might not understand what FODMAPs stands for. So and I know this is complicated and technical, but we'll lead the listeners to your website afterwards so they can really, find more information, because I know you have some printable materials and things of that nature. But let's go through what FODMAPs really stands for. It's FODMAPS.
Right. So it's an acronym, and the F stands for fermentable. The O stands for oligosaccharides, the D for disaccharide, the M for monosaccharide, and the P for polyols. And you don't ever really need to say those words ever again. But they are types of sugars and fibers that are commonly malabsorbed. So to break it down, oligosaccharides are a water-soluble fiber. They're found in foods like wheat, onion, garlic, artichokes. They're also found in an additive commonly added to cereals and some yogurt products called chicory root extract. Um, Disaccharides in FODMAPs is a two-chain sugar, and that is lactose. And up to 70% of the world actually has issues with malabsorbing lactose. And so it's fairly common. And really just requires utilizing things like lactose-free milk, such as Lactaid, and things like cheeses, hard cheeses, and butter are low lactose, and those can be included while on the low FODMAP diet. And then the monosaccharide fructose is the most osmotic or the most significant in pulling in water into the intestine. And fructose is found in fruits. It's known as sort of the fruit sugar, but it's not a problem when it's in a food in equal amounts as glucose in the food. So it's really only certain foods that have this excess fructose in them that contributes to this malabsorption and this water being dragged into the gut. And some examples of foods that have excess fructose would include things like honey, apples, pears, apple juice, applesauce, mango, and high fructose corn syrup. So those would be modified on the low FODMAP diet. And then the last is polyols, and this is another term for polyols is sugar alcohols. We find sugar alcohols added to things like sugar-free gum and mints and some pediatric medications to sweeten them up, but also naturally in foods. So there's sorbitol and mannitol are the two primary sugar alcohols or polyols in the food supply, and those are found in stone fruits like peaches, plums, nectarines, and also mannitol is found in things like cauliflower and celery. And I know this seems like such a crazy kind of collection of foods, but there's lots of great resources, Jill, as you mentioned on my resource on my website that breaks this down. What are sources of excess fructose? What are good sources? What are some, low FODMAP sources of fruits and vegetables so that it makes it a little bit more easy when you see it in black and white. So, yeah.
So do patients, when they go on, and we'll talk about how to get started with the low FODMAPs diet, but when patients go on or children go on a low FODMAPs diet, I want to clarify, it's not a no FODMAPs diet, it's a low FODMAPs diet, right? Can you make that distinction a little bit more clear?
Absolutely. So FODMAPs are in a multitude of foods, as I just mentioned, and there is no need to have a zero FODMAP diet. So the research that's looked at this diet showing that it is really terrific at managing symptoms of IBS have modified the foods to what we call low FODMAP foods. And to your point, and to kind of extend on what you were saying, the low FODMAP diet is not a forever diet. So we do a 2 to 6 week elimination diet where we remove the real high FODMAP foods from the diet to the best of our ability. Sometimes a pizza party slips in and a child or an adult has a pizza during the elimination phase, and that's fine. We don't encourage you to do that routinely throughout the elimination phase because we want to see how the diet is it effective or not for you. However, things happen and you don't need to be quite perfect on this. And then after this 2 to 6 weeks of elimination of the high FODMAP foods, we do sort of a systematic reintroduction of FODMAPs. And the reason we do that is really for multiple of reasons. One of them is we don't want anyone to be restricting FODMAPs that maybe don't bother them. So as I mentioned, the various subtypes, lactose and excess fructose, not everyone's sensitive to every single FODMAP. So we want to reintroduce these FODMAP foods very systematically and with the hopes that we can determine what foods were triggering the symptoms and what foods were not, so that we can liberalize the diet as much as possible. And then the last phase of the diet is really reintroducing those foods that did not trigger symptoms onto the plate. And so we kind of get a better barometer as to how much of those foods that and FODMAPs they can take at one meal without inducing symptoms. And one of the things I think that's very important to mention here is a failed reintroduction or a symptom that would be concerning would be one that was significant, that contributed to pain, that contributed to sort of what we'd call an IBS flare. Not just I tried to reintroduce a food and I felt one gas bubble. A little gas is actually a healthy thing. So it's really differentiating the difference. And one last point I think that's really important when working with children in the low FODMAP diet is to not term high FODMAPs foods as bad or evil or illegal. They're just foods that might bother their stomach. And I don't want kids, while they're developing just healthy eating habits, to have a list of foods that they're going to eliminate forever or that they deem as evil or bad, because FODMAPs innately are in very healthy foods, and having that correlation that the food is unhealthy or bad is really not a good way to develop nourishing, healthy eating habits.
I totally agree. And so you've made a couple of really great points here that speak to me as well, because as you know, and I mentioned this in the introduction, I have my own little story about IBS and having a post-infectious IBS, which has been officially diagnosed. And through the process of you helping me with the low FODMAPs diet, I've discovered that the O foods, or the oligosaccharides, are my foods that cause symptoms. So is that something that you see also in the whole process, that stage 1 of going low FODMAP, stage 2 of reintroduction? Is that something that you see in your patients as well, where they're able to really identify one or two of those categories of foods that are the trigger?
Absolutely. And so we definitely do see that there's just often just a few FODMAPs that are triggering their symptoms, and then the individual can start liberalizing their diet, which is great. And I would say that the oligosaccharides, particularly onion and garlic, are often the most difficult to reintroduce. On the other hand, the oligosaccharides, onion and garlic, have prebiotics, and the prebiotics are known healthy carbohydrates that feed beneficial gut bacteria. So what we try to do in an individual that really, has challenges with the oligosaccharides is to see if there's small amounts of those that we can add to the diet. So maybe the patient or the child can't eat onion soup, for instance, but maybe they can tolerate a small amount of onion in a hamburger or in a stir fry, or a small amount of garlic. So again, trying to get those foods back in is always a good idea. And particularly the oligosaccharides, which have this known kind of prebiotic, healthy food source for the microbes that live in our body, which we all have, and they help us digest food, and they keep our immune system healthy. They create vitamins and minerals, or vitamins primarily. And so that's really, it's finding that fine line and working with the kids to expand that diet for that reason.
Yeah, and I think the other point that you made that's so important is this whole prevalence of food fear, and just in our society, and I think a lot of parents are finding it very challenging to raise children who are very neutral about food in today's world, because number one, some parents aren't neutral about food themselves, but number two, just we're surrounded, obviously, by messages of eat this, not that, and so forth. So it is a really important point to make that, this is a temporary diet for symptom relief, and to not make food is not the enemy. Food just needs to be, modified to reduce the symptoms. Now, I guess my other question is, I'm saying that, are there children that have to be on low FODMAPs for long periods of time or permanently?
Great question, and one that we really try, we don't know the long-term effects of being on the low FODMAP diet indefinitely. And so we really try and make every effort to manage symptoms with allowing some of the FODMAPs back into the diet. I would say in my experience, the majority of patients or kids that we see are able to add some foods back in. However, it's been difficult sometimes, I think, working with some of the parents that are very black and white. And so I think as educators, we really need to be, take it seriously that the low FODMAP diet in research has been shown to reduce some beneficial bacteria. And additionally, it's been shown to raise the pH of stool. And what that might mean is that certain pathogenic or disease-causing bacteria might be able to grow more easily in the colon if there's less acid in the colon. So again, I don't think really anyone needs to be on the full elimination diet long term. I think efforts with a good, knowledgeable dietitian and parents and kids that are all on the same page, there is ability to add at least some of these FODMAPs back in. The quantities might be minuscule, but I think that's still, trying to liberalize. And the other point that's very important here is that tolerance to FODMAPs can change over time. And that may be due to the fact that our gut bacteria changes over time. And individuals with IBS, their gut bacteria is a little bit more I don't want to say fragile, but it changes a little bit more rapidly. So it is possible, and we do see this in practice, that when we kind of stabilize the gut bacteria, is what I'm presuming is happening, patients are able to eat more foods, which is terrific.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about, I can sort of relate to this, having the symptoms that I had. And as you know, I came to a pinnacle of desperate need for help. And I experienced relief on low FODMAPs within 4 days, just like you said, but I continued with it and, proceeded with my GI physician to get the full workup. And, my workup was normal. So talk to me about that. Do people go through this? They have symptoms. They go on the diet. They go through their workup. Nothing really shows up. So the default diagnosis was post-infectious IBS. I still can create symptoms if I'm not super good, strict where I was, back in February, but I still experience symptoms occasionally. And now I can very easily tie it back to what I ate. But I guess my question is, do you see patients where, they don't have like a workup that suggests all these, diagnoses?
Right. So usually with irritable bowel syndrome, there's no really organic disease. The colonoscopy looks great. The endoscopy looks great. We do see in patients that present with diarrhea predominance that about 60% of those have overlapping small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that condition is where bacteria, sneak up into the small intestine in large numbers where they really don't belong. And it is treated with antibiotics. So to go back to your original sort of comment, and that is, how quickly do patients, see benefit? We've had some clients feel better within 24 hours. It's pretty amazing just restricting this food source for our microbes and reducing the water coming into the gut, how that can quickly turn patients around. It is quite remarkable. And really, I feel like a little magician sometimes because it's such a quick, like you're going to feel better in 24 hours and some people have been suffering for, especially my adult patients up to a decade or more. It's pretty awesome. So I think the key here is that it can respond quickly. Your tolerance can change to FODMAPs over time. And as far as testing and imaging, a lot of patients, they just don't find anything because IBS is more of a motility disorder. Unless they're really looking at the motility of the gut, which is often not done in a traditional workup, they're not going to really see anything physically. There's no inflammation or other sort of metrics that the GI doctor would see in traditional screening.
Mm-hmm. And when you say motility, you mean the movement of food through the gut and the timing it takes to move food through the gut.
I do mean that. And I also mean just there's a number of different things that go on. You have peristalsis that moves food through, and some people have what we call transit time that's reduced or elongated depending on whether if they have a slow moving intestine or a fast-moving intestine. And then there's also this other really important thing I think that patients with IBS need to hear about, and that's called the migrating motor complex. And the migrating motor complex is a cleansing wave that occurs, is kind of known as the housekeeper of the small intestine. And it only initiates this cleansing wave when you're in between eating cycles. So it takes about 92 minutes to up to 3 to 4 hours for that to really initiate a good cleansing wave of the small intestine, which is important for keeping those bacteria out of the small intestine. So why this is important for individuals with IBS is that if you're constantly eating, like kids sometimes are, and you don't give that belly a little chance to, or the small intestine to really do that good migrating motor complex cleansing wave, you're not going to ever get rid of those. You're going to be kind of feeding the microbes and keeping them in there and feeding them a little longer than you should be. So one of the things that we use in our practice or encourage most of our patients with IBS is to really try to, you can have a snack, don't get me wrong, but try to give a 2 to 4 hour window between eating. And with children, if hunger always trumps the cleansing wave need. So if little Johnny is really hungry and it's only been an hour since he's eaten, by all means feed little Johnny. But when you can do those spaced time in between meals and snack times, that might give the body an opportunity to really help with the cleansing cycles of the intestine, which is part of the motility of the intestine. There's lots of different processes that occur.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I talk a lot about structured feeding, whereby we are putting that space of 3 to 4 hours in between meals and snacks whenever possible, just to even build the appetite. So it's refreshing to hear that it actually supports gut health as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what kinds of nutritional concerns would you say a parent needs to be aware of if they are to get started on the low FODMAPs diet? And first and foremost, I know and I want to say this, I know you'll say this too, but if a child starts on a low FODMAPs diet, they should be managed and carefully watched and guided through it with a registered dietitian who knows about low FODMAPs diet. Let's put that out there.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And don't self-diagnose your child with IBS either. You should definitely be working with your pediatrician and a gastroenterologist if your child is experiencing significant GI distress. And before we embark on the low FODMAP diet, we often have the patient checked for celiac disease because celiac disease can present with symptoms similar to IBS. And when we go on the low FODMAP diet, we are modifying gluten in the diet. And so if we do that first, and then we want to do some blood tests to check for celiac, the blood tests might not be as accurate. So we screen for celiac disease typically first. I recommend that. And then we would put the individual with guidance of a registered dietitian. Absolutely. It'll make the diet so much easier. And some things that we want to keep in mind from a nutrient standpoint is really the low FODMAP diet can be very well balanced and provide adequate nutrition for an adult or child. But you do want to make sure that you include lactose-free products like lactose-free milk. No need to just take milk out of the equation. The low FODMAP diet is not a dairy-free diet. It's just one that is modified in lactose. So hard cheeses are acceptable. You can get lactose-free cottage cheese. You can get lactose-free milk. So no reason to restrict those, and those will provide great sources of calcium and vitamin D. And you can also get lactose-free at some specialty stores. You can find lactose-free yogurt as well. Another area that sometimes can take a hit without careful planning is adequate fiber. And so we do make sure that at every meal, our patients have a little bit of fiber, and there's lots of terrific low FODMAP fiber sources. You can get, strawberries, kiwi fruit are great sources. You could do oatmeal, nuts and seeds. There's a number of suitable nuts and seeds that are acceptable, such as chia seeds, which offer about 5 grams of fiber per tablespoon. So just even adding little bits of chia to some oatmeal with some strawberries in the morning, or sprinkle chia seeds on some a rice cake with peanut butter would be another option. But just trying to pay attention to the amount of fiber, and so you space that out throughout the day. And then I think if they balance, I always tell my clients as well, if your plate is balanced, you will feel balanced. And it's actually a balanced plate, and I'll expand on that a bit, is really, I think, the best model for GI health too. So when I have my patients, I use the model of half a plate of fruits and vegetables. Typically on the low FODMAP diet, we do suggest just 1 fruit serving per meal. That helps with keeping the fructose content at a reasonable amount. So we do 1 serving of fruit, some vegetables, protein, and then a starchy carb, potatoes, brown rice, gluten-free pasta. We do use gluten-free pasta because wheat is restricted or modified on the low FODMAP diet. So the gluten-free pasta option works well on the elimination phase. But with a balanced plate, often we're getting the fiber. We make sure they have, either cheese, yogurt, or milk, and some kind of healthy fat as well. And often we recommend either nuts or seeds or olive oil for some healthy fat. And with that balanced plate, I find my patients do well, just from a GI standpoint. They're not getting all of their fiber in one meal, for instance, or all of their fat in one meal, which fat and fiber can affect motility or the movement of the intestine, which might be a problem as well.
Right. So you're spreading it out throughout the day as opposed to lumping it into one meal.
Absolutely.
Great. What about growth and development? Have you seen any impact on the ability for children to grow normally on the low FODMAPs diet?
It's interesting. I haven't really seen a lot of the literature on this, so I'll be commenting more anecdotally. But we find that when patients feel less bloated, they feel more hungry. So with the reduction in bloating, which is a significant benefit of the low FODMAP diet, there's less fullness. And so the kids tend to feel a little bit more hungry and able to eat a little bit more. But I think the same sort of rules of thumb in working with a good pediatric dietitian, really focusing on some of the key nutrients and adequate calories are important during the growth phase. That obviously is essential.
I know sometimes people say that they lose weight initially on the low FODMAPs diet. Certainly the bloating gets relieved, and I just didn't know if you saw that happening in children as well.
Sometimes I think really it comes down to individuals without the guidance of a dietitian will often come in and have lost weight. I think the diet is a challenge to implement on your own, and it really should be guided by a dietitian that's paying that attention. You can't just, for instance, turn your diet upside down and then all your favorite go-to snacks and meals are off the table and not have a plan. So it is easy if you're relying on certain, grabbing wheat bread and having a sandwich at 3 o'clock, but you don't like gluten-free bread, so then you're deleting that snack option. That's a problem. So again, and I think that we do see patients come to our office that have lost weight, but we're able to regain it when we give them some good tips on how to maximize their low FODMAP diet.
So just shifting gears a little bit here, because it's a relatively new diet and a new, not a new diagnosis, but a new application for treatment. Where do you see the future of low FODMAP diet and or just the management of IBS based on what you're seeing in the literature and what you're practicing and your, conversations with other digestive disease health providers? What's on the horizon?
So I think, there's been some really interesting research looking at samples of stool, looking at different types of bacteria and bacterial metabolites, and being able to determine who's going to be most responsive to the low FODMAP diet. So I think that it's sooner than later, we'll be doing stool samples and actually looking at them and then identifying certain kids and adults that might be, more appropriate for the low FODMAP diet. Additionally, there's interesting research just looking at how do we have to do this full elimination diet? Could we modify the elimination diet based on the patient's symptoms? And I'm already starting to do that in my practice, so that if patients come with a lot of the lower GI symptoms, I will cherry pick out the oligosaccharides because those lower GI symptoms of gas and constipation seems to respond more significantly to reducing fructans and galacto-oligosaccharides, which are the primary FODMAPs in the oligosaccharide group. Again, sorry for the science terms. So patients that have lower GI symptoms of gas and not a lot of diarrhea, I might just restrict and modify the oligosaccharides instead of putting them on the full-blown elimination diet.
So wheat, onions, garlic, that sort of thing.
Artichokes, chicory root extract, exactly. Those particular foods. Also beans are in that family as well. And so I would modify just those. What we've learned in some of the novel studies that they've done looking at FODMAPs is the smaller the FODMAP, the more likely it pulls water into the intestine. And as I mentioned earlier, the excess fructose is the smallest of the FODMAPs. So in an individual with diarrhea predominance and not a lot of gas, I might just modify the excess fructose. In fact, I had a young girl, she was 12 years old, come to our practice, and she was just experiencing episodic diarrhea. Her mother had been diagnosed with IBS, and we, after reviewing her intake, she was not diagnosed yet with IBS, but the diarrhea was significant for her. So I wasn't going to put her on a full-blown low FODMAP diet. We talked to her gastroenterologist, and we decided we would just modify the excess fructose foods, which were significant in her plan. She had a lot of applesauce and apple juice. And so we just switched her over to drinking more water, less soda with high fructose corn syrup. And that was it. And those foods, you can have plenty of fruits on the that don't have excess fructose. Strawberries, bananas, oranges, kiwi, melons, blueberries. There's a ton of fruits. So it's easy to modify the excess fructose, and it was just that minor change in her diet that was enough. The other thing is too, some individuals, even with the diagnosis of IBS, adding a little bit of fiber to their diet might be enough. And so before we do this full-blown elimination diet, I would want to make sure too that the individual had tried some basic cleaning up the diet, balanced plate, doing some general kind of housekeeping before I embark on the low FODMAP diet as the initial treatment plan.
Mm-hmm. And what about, Kate, probiotics? That was one thing that I always did before I contracted dysentery, and am now back on, and it's helping quite a bit. And that is something my GI doctor, put me on. He said, you need to go back on your probiotic. And what do you think about that as part of the management?
So I definitely think if I'd like to do one sort of modality at a time, and like a well-balanced diet, if I would want to try the probiotics often first, just to see if that's enough, because adding a probiotic to your diet or your regimen is a lot easier than going on a 6-week elimination diet and turning things a little upside down. So I definitely think, and there's great research in IBS and growing where certain probiotics can have beneficial effects. What I do recommend is that we base the probiotic choice on the symptom. And there's a great U.S. clinical probiotic guide that is online, and you can also get it via an app that will tell you, based on your symptoms, what are the best probiotics for that indication. So individuals with diarrhea, I find the Culturel products, now they come in a number of varieties, but the Culturel that does not have inulin in it, I often add that to try that for diarrhea predominance. Align works well for my constipated patients, but there's a variety of different probiotics for different indications. And it is important that you don't just randomly select one that has no science behind it. You want to select a probiotic that has evidence in the literature to support its use for the indication that you're trying to correct.
Well, I want to get that link and include it in the show notes for everybody. That will be really helpful, I think, for a lot of parents to be able to see that, and professionals listening to this as well. Speaking of resources and finding help, what are your recommendations for that for listeners today?
I've been doing the low FODMAP diet in my practice since 2009, and it's so nice to see this growing wealth of interest. So there are lots of really terrific resources. Nestle sponsored some efforts with University of Michigan and Cedars-Sinai to create a website called My GI Nutrition, and it's an interactive, kind of fun. It's kind of like little space aliens talking about FODMAPs, and it's a great site to go through the basics of the diet, and I helped with that project, and I think it's a great resource. Additionally, I've been blogging about low FODMAP diet for quite some time, and I have a number of free resources on my website, which is katescarlata.com, and this includes resources such as grocery lists, high and low FODMAP checklists, but also a listing of FODMAP knowledgeable dietitians that if you're looking for someone, there's a list of dietitians around the country that could help you. And then more recently, I just launched a low FODMAP grocery guide app, and this is available through iTunes. All the proceeds are actually going back into preparation of more free resources for patients. And also we're working on a video that will share some IBS stories and make it really personal, just a personal side to the diagnosis of IBS and what has worked for various patients. So we're doing that. Also, Monash University has a fantastic low FODMAP diet app, and Nestle Health Science also has Low FODMAP Central that has some recipes as well as free downloadable handouts for health professionals and for parents trying to navigate the diet.
Great, great. I will include all those links in the show notes, folks, so you can investigate and explore those. Kate, it's been so great to have you on the show. I know you mentioned your website and where people can find you. What's up for you in the future, and what's happening?
So I'm really excited. I'm right now. I'm in a blended Masters of Public Health program and learning a lot about study design. And I really hope to participate in designing studies and really looking at some nutritional effects to, how diet impacts IBS symptoms and how IBS affects changes to the gut microbiome, because it's just amazing the amount of literature that is coming out daily, looking at how these little microbes that reside in our intestine affect so many diseases, whether it's heart disease and diabetes, obesity, certainly lots of gut symptoms, also autism and schizophrenia. And in fact, this evening, I'm going to be talking to my class on the effects of the gut microbiota, the little microbes, what they produce, and how that affects anxiety and depression. So I really am looking forward to continue to learn and to share what I learn as often as possible through my blog. And I really one of my biggest sort of goals really is to make this journey easier for those out there living with IBS. So that they don't have to suffer and really can thrive and live the life they deserve.
I bet you see a lot of people who've been living with this for a long time and had no idea that life could be different.
Yeah, it is. It really, like I mentioned earlier, I do sometimes feel like I have this little magic wand. And, sometimes it's not as clear as just the diet. A lot of my clients need other interventions as well. But the diet can be a big piece. And, how easy to, really, it sounds difficult, but once you acclimate to a modified low FODMAP diet, and I'm on one. I needed to be on one because of my surgery. It's fairly liberal, but it has made a huge difference in my quality of life and ability to travel around the globe and not be restricted due to symptoms.
I hear you. You waved your magic wand on me, and I'm on a modified low FODMAP diet too, and it does make a world of difference. So I am in full support of your pursuing this. I think it's absolutely wonderful. We're so lucky to have you as a resource, and I'm so lucky to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Jill.
I hope you enjoyed today's show with Kate Scarlata. She is a master when it comes to the low FODMAPs diet for individuals, either children or adults. She's also provided a wealth of resources for you to check out. I'll have those included in the show notes over at www.jillcastle.com/30 for episode number 30. If today's your first day listening in and you enjoyed what I had to offer you today, please hit the subscribe button. That subscribe button will allow you to get updated every time I post a brand new show. And hey, if you're a regular listener, do me a favor and head over to iTunes and rate and review the show. It helps the Nourished Child podcast reach more people, especially parents. If you're not on my email newsletter, please join me. It's the place where you will hear about courses, books, and other resources you can find helpful in the process of raising a nourished child. As always, thanks for joining me today. I'm so glad you were here. Please be sure to give that child in your life, big or small, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.